All right, guys, welcome back to the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. We got our Q&A going on today. As always, I'm just going to be reading these off, shooting from the hip. Collected these questions on Friday through Instagram, which I'll be doing every week moving forward, and then dropping this podcast, giving all those answers on Sundays. Guys, if you send a question in and I don't get to it, it was one of two things. Either I was just overloaded with a ton of questions and just had to pick and choose a little bit, and sometimes I'll get questions that just don't really have a lot of context, or there's just not really much of a conversation to go into. So, if you can provide a little bit more context, sometimes when it's a little bit of a vague, open-ended question, it's hard to get into. But quick announcement as far as what to expect on the podcast coming up. On Tuesday, I'll be dropping my episode with Joe Big House Ken, legendary NFL strength and conditioning coach. We're going to talk a lot about the state of NFL and collegiate strength and conditioning and NIL and all that stuff. And then the week after that, we're going to have Justin Harris as the episode, bodybuilding prep coach. That's going to be a great episode. After that, we'll have a few lifters and athletes and many more interesting guests. So stay tuned. But let's go ahead and dive right into these questions. Okay. Your best meals for somebody with gut problems. Okay, so number one, we definitely want to go for meals that are going to digest well. If we're having indigestion and we're eating foods that are causing bloating, that is just going to exacerbate any gut issues that are already there. So make sure the foods you're eating are digesting well. Now, optimizing digestion is not necessarily going to alleviate gut problems as a whole. So a few things you can try to do. You can bring glutamine into the picture. I like utilizing glutamine at a high dose. You can look up dosing protocols. I don't want to give too many specific prescriptions on that, but I would take it first thing in the morning, AM, empty stomach. That can be a useful tool. Utilizing bone broth can be a helpful addition for leaky gut. And then I like using fermented foods, kimchi, sauerkraut, Greek yogurt, kefir, kombucha, things like that. Those live active bacteria cultures are going to be beneficial for your gut health and microbiome. Potentially utilizing a probiotic can be helpful. But those are the things that I would start with. Optimizing digestion, try bringing in some glutamine, try bringing in some fermented foods and maybe a probiotic. Okay, moving on. Thoughts on creatine HCl versus creatine monohydrate? I would always just say go with creatine monohydrate. I mean, of all the supplements out there, creatine monohydrate is the most universally studied and agreed upon. Hey, this thing works. It's cheap, it's easy, don't overcomplicate it. Just get good old-fashioned creatine monohydrate, single ingredient. Don't worry about loading, timing, all that stuff. Just take it every day. 5 grams is going to be pretty good for just about everybody. Okay, let's see. How have you balanced your regimen with the newborn, sleep, meal prep, training, etc.? So good question. Well, first and foremost, stepping away from football has been absolutely crucial for this. With my new career path, I'm able to be at home a lot. So, when I'm out, I'm at the gym, I'm filming content, things like that. But when it comes to the podcast or doing coaching with all my clients, writing programs, writing diets, those things, editing, that all takes place at home. So I'm able to be there and just move my schedule around as needed, not having set times where I have to be somewhere. Usually, I mean, it just makes it a lot more flexible as far as when I can allocate time to helping with the baby or helping with my wife. I'm at home, so that makes making meals a lot easier. I'm a little more flexible on a bedtime. So to be honest, the new just being self-employed now has just afforded me a lot of schedule freedoms that has alleviated a lot of that stress. Now, with that said, I'm just as busy as ever. I just have the ability to move my work around to different times of the day and just be flexible in that aspect. But Just staying organized is huge, and just kind of, if I kind of wake up and I'm just shooting from the hip as far as when I'm going to do stuff, I'll often find I'm just kind of floating around, wasting time in transitions. So I try to wake up and kind of assess the day and look at, okay, where can I get X accomplished? Where can I get Y accomplished? How can I be the most efficient with this time? How can I efficiently transition from, one activity to the next? Where are my opportunities where I can get my meals in, etc. So having a plan and a schedule helps. Um, okay, when is a good age to go get your testosterone checked? So I would do regular blood work kind of regardless of age. I would get blood work if you're young and healthy and you're not using drugs and things like that. Get blood work done twice, 3 times a year, and within that, get your testosterone looked at. Now, if you're someone who you're getting into your late 30s, early 40s, probably a good time to get that looked at. At any age beyond that, definitely. But low T can kind of hit men at different points of their life. I mean, I've seen it happen in men in their 20s. It's happening at earlier and earlier ages in today's day and age. So, if you're showing symptoms of it, like decreased libido, just kind of low energy, maybe you're suddenly, gaining body fat and losing muscle mass and there's been no real change to your diet or activity. Those could be symptoms to look into. But regardless, when you get your blood work done, I would just get it looked at within that. Okay, tips for figuring out macros when cutting. So, what I tell everyone, establishing macros and calories from the get-go, the first thing you want to do, take a meal journal. Just establish what are your maintenance calories right now. Most of us, we're kind of operating around, if we're not intentionally gaining or losing, we're probably kind of in maintenance. So if you take a food journal for a week every day, just record everything you're eating, tally up the calories, take an average across the week. Okay, that's a good snapshot of your average maintenance caloric intake. And then to initiate a cut, I would subtract 500 calories a day from that. That's your new calorie target. And then from there, I would do, a gram of protein per pound of body weight. We know there's 4 calories in a single gram of protein. So do the math there. Boom, subtract those calories out of the total. And then I would get the majority of your calories from there, from carbohydrates. I would probably go for, with remaining calories, something like a 70-30% split between carbs and fats, and play with it from there. But that's a good place to start. Okay, who has influenced you the most in your career in training and nutrition? I'll name a few. I'll say, first and foremost, as a strength and conditioning coach, I'll always credit Joe Ken, who will be on the next episode of the podcast. I'll always credit him to being one of my biggest mentors and influences, teaching me a lot about being a football strength and conditioning coach. He's in the private side of things now too. So we collaborate all the time, and he's been a huge mentor for me. Another guy who was a big influence for me, Mark Bell. He and his YouTube channel, all his content he was putting out, I was watching that from when I was a teenager, 15 years ago. And that really kind of gave me a lot of influence getting into strength sports and interest in nutrition and getting lean and things like that. Another guy I definitely want to credit would be Brian Hess. He, when I met him, he was the head strength and conditioning coach for the University of North Carolina. I was working for him. I credit him to teaching me a lot about coaching on the floor, just kind of bringing a certain energy and a certain passion to coaching and communicating with athletes. I definitely credit him for influencing me quite a bit. And then from a nutritional standpoint, Justin Harris has been a huge influence for me, especially with carb cycling, things like that. And then beyond that, it's been taking from a lot of different influences in nutrition. But if I had to name one in that realm, it'd be Justin. Okay, let's see. Thoughts on the carnivore diet, pros and cons. Yeah, so my thoughts really on any diet is there is no magic diet. You know, I, if you are looking at a diet and just blanket statement saying, this is how people should be eating, this is the optimal way for people to eat, then I disagree with you. I take issue with that. Now, if you look at any given diet and you say, this is a diet that I make work for me, I buy into it, I enjoy it, and I effectively get to my goal utilizing it and I can sustain it, then I have no issue with you, regardless of the diet. So, can carnivore be effective? Yeah. I know plenty of people who have utilized a carnivore diet and leveraged it to their success, whether that was to lose weight, whether that was simply to reap some of the potential, cognitive benefits as far as mental clarity, not having peaks and valleys in energy, reducing inflammation, things like that. There are people who have, reported having success in that aspect with it. When it comes to anyone really pushing performance, whether you're an athlete, a lifter, a bodybuilder, or anyone really concerned with carrying a lot of muscle tissue, I would not recommend a low carbohydrate approach. I mean, carbohydrates are our primary optimal fuel source. And when it comes to performance within any sport that it has an energy system demand that uses carbohydrates, fuel your body with carbohydrates. That's the best gas source for the job. Carbohydrates can be stored as glycogen. It's much harder for the body to store carbohydrates as body fat compared to dietary fat, which has a much easier pathway to being stored as body fat. Carbohydrates are generally easier to digest. They're less calorie dense. So when it comes to physique-based goals, I usually push for incorporating carbohydrates and going lower with the fat. Now, with that said, if my goal was primarily longevity, I just wanted to feel good. I didn't want to carry tons of muscle mass. I didn't want to be as strong as possible. I would probably be using some sort of iteration of a low carb, possibly even carnivore-ish diet. So, and that's another thing. I see a lot of people say like, oh, I'm carnivore, but they're eating, a lot of food that's not meat, and it seems like it's kind of gray on like what's really carnivore. Is it strictly just meat, or can you'll see people who use like some fruits and like avocado and raw honey and things like that. And, it seems to be a little bit gray on what's truly carnivore, what's not, so bottom line is, if you enjoy that type of diet, it works for you, you're effectively getting to your goal, I'm not going to tell you otherwise. Okay, let's see. What's the best way to lose unwanted fat while also trying to gain muscle? Cut first? Yeah, almost always I'm going to recommend lose body fat first, get lean. Getting leaner will always set up a muscle gain phase. It'll always put you in a better position to move forward. If you're someone who's already carrying a decent bit of body fat, you're really not in a great spot to start gaining muscle. Now, with that said, if you are a beginner, a total novice, simply getting in the weight room and starting lifting without really even worrying about your diet, you're probably going to start just gaining some muscle and losing some body fat just from kind of those newbie gains, recomp effect. But if you're someone who is not a pure newbie, not a pure beginner, and you're carrying a decent bit of body fat, I would almost always recommend start things off by dieting. You're going to just kind of create this blank slate that's going to set you up to go forward from there. You're going to improve a lot of metrics within your body. You're going to improve your insulin sensitivity. You're going to improve your appetite. You're going to improve your digestion, your blood pressure. You're going to feel better. Your appetite's going to be up. You're going to be much more receptive to a calorie surplus and utilizing those calories beneficially. You're giving yourself a runway to add size and have some wiggle room to add a little bit of body fat along the way, because you'll go into that gain phase from a very lean starting point, as opposed to trying to start gaining when you're already carrying quite a bit of body fat. Now you don't have much wiggle room to keep adding sides. You're going to add some fat with it, and then you're going to be unacceptably fat. So I would almost always recommend start things off by losing body fat, and don't try to walk the tightrope of, doing both. Just set your sights on fat loss from the get-go. It's going to set you up better long term. Okay. Hard quick cut versus long drawn out cut. Pros and cons. Okay. So I almost always advocate for a patient, slow and steady diet. We want to create a new normal for our body. We also want to ensure that we are not losing muscle tissue through the course of this diet. We want to keep our metabolism as high as possible during the course of this diet. So I would always diet slowly. Start with a modest calorie deficit. Drop a little bit of body fat week to week to week. If we do this thing drastically, your metabolism is going to downregulate and adapt very quickly. We're going to quickly hit a big plateau, and we're not going to have enough calories to again reduce and keep pushing for fat loss. We're just going to hit a wall where we can't pull food any lower. And we're also big time risking losing muscle tissue. When you're dieting on a big deficit, it's hard for your body to just prioritize burning fat. You're going to lose muscle tissue along the way. Whereas if you're in a small deficit, you're training well, you're giving your body a good stimulus in training to keep and retain all your muscle tissue, and there's only this small deficit, you are going to have a much better time prioritizing fat loss as the weight you're losing as opposed to muscle tissue. And again, you're going to create a new normal for yourself. If you lose 20 pounds in 5 weeks, guarantee you're just going to slingshot right back up when that ends. Versus you lose 20 pounds over the course of 12 weeks. Well, your body has had time to adapt and adjust along the way, and you're kind of creating this new homeostasis for your system, this new set point, and you're not going to be as likely just to snap right back up to your old size. All right. What advice do you have for someone pursuing an exercise science degree? Well, as far as the degree itself, pay attention in class, go to class, do your homework, all those good things. I think you should have a love and interest in it, and start forming an idea of what you want to do post degree, what you want to do with that degree in terms of a career path. I think having that kind of goal will help motivate you within school. Now, if what you're asking is advice on how to leverage that degree and what to do with it, well, if you're going into, you want to be some sort of a coach, you want to be some sort of a trainer, you know, the money is probably going to be in the private sector. That's going to be, personal training, things like that. There are lots and lots and lots of jobs available in that sector. If you're trying to go into sports, there are a lot fewer jobs. And chances are, in order to get a job, you need a connection within the organization that you're applying to. It's rare, at least in, football, that we would hire someone off of a cold resume. It was always someone who was recommended to us. It was always someone we knew of already, right? So, I would probably look into landing an internship if you want to go sports route. Once you're done with school, I'd recommend getting certified, getting your CSCCA or your CSCS. And if you do just want to go into personal training, you know, start getting some experience communicating, getting on the floor, coaching, teaching. You can know all the X's and O's of the textbook, but at the end of the day, you're going to need to be able to communicate with someone you're coaching or you're training. You're going to have to transfer that knowledge in a way that they understand and they can utilize. You're going to have to be a salesman. You're going to have to sell yourself, sell your services. So, learn the X's and O's, learn the textbook, learn the academic side, but understand the reality is, in terms of making money, getting jobs, and excelling in the field after that, it's really going to come down to more of the actionable, intangible knowledge and skills. So don't sleep on that side of things. Let's see. Do you prefer your hypertrophy program or your power building program in a fat loss phase? Honestly, you can use either. So when it comes to a fat loss phase, I really tell people you use a style of training that you enjoy, that you love, that you're going to get after, that you can train hard. The diet should do the legwork in terms of pulling the body fat off. So, like with the power building program, can you effectively lose body fat with that? Absolutely. It's going to be a lot of volume, a lot of density. The first block's a big high volume work capacity block. Um, a lot of free weights with some machine work, and then, but you're still, there is a hypertrophy component. So you're targeting all the various muscle groups still. The bodybuilding program is going to be more machine, dumbbell, cable based. A perfectly fine approach as well. At the end of the day, the training is really primarily to retain the muscle while you're losing fat via the diet. So as long as you're adequately at least getting a stimulus to all the muscles, all the muscle tissue you're trying to retain, either one of those is going to be effective. So I would go with the one that you're going to enjoy and buy into the most. Okay, got one more here. How would you assess a bilateral deficit? How would you assess if a bilateral deficit was a limiting factor for performance? Okay, so this is an interesting one. So we're talking about, an asymmetry between limbs here. And this can, typically in a sports performance setting, this will be diagnosed on a Nord board or a force plate, something like that. If this is like a post-surgical thing, there are, of course, plenty of other ways that you're testing the strength, and you can identify an asymmetry. That might be just an asymmetry in quad strength post ACL tear, and you're doing some sort of leg extension test, whatever. So in terms of when is this actually an issue we need to worry about? So usually if you were to do some sort of test on any athlete to assess, is there an asymmetry? Most athletes, most people are going to have some level of an asymmetry. This is not necessarily an issue. This is not necessarily something that you need to correct. The thing you really need to keep an eye out for is, let's say you identify someone has this asymmetry, this deficit between limbs. Let's just call it hamstring strength. And you measure this weekly. And you see with an individual that this asymmetry, it's just kind of their baseline. It's just kind of their normal. That's kind of how they are. It's not improving or regressing. It just kind of is what it is. This is really not something you need to worry about. That's just who they are. Now, let's say you see an asymmetry and it's getting worse week to week, or you're seeing it changing. Okay, that raises your eyebrows a little bit. So the next step would be watch them move, watch them run. Is this manifesting in a change in their movement pattern? Because then we're looking at a potential issue. So let's say someone has a 5% asymmetry between their hamstrings in a baseline test. And then all of a sudden, they register a 12% asymmetry. And this is unusual for them. Okay, well, let's watch them run. Let's watch them sprint. Let's watch them move in the weight room. Are they moving differently? And this can be helpful if you've taken, some sort of baseline video on a sprint, so you can kind of compare. Now, if this is not changing the way they move, they're not demonstrating some sort of compensation pattern in the way they're running and moving, probably not really a huge issue. But if it is changing the way they're moving, they are compensating for this asymmetry, whatever's causing it. They are changing the way they move as a response to it. And they're now moving in a way that is unnatural to their own specific sprint mechanics or squat pattern or whatever. Now they're setting themselves up to get hurt because their body is not used to this compensation pattern. And when you're doing that compensation pattern suddenly at high speed or under a lot of weight, that's when something pops. So bottom line is, worry about an asymmetry when you're looking at a change, and a change that's away from their baseline. And then identify, is this asymmetry manifesting itself in how the athlete moves? All right, guys. So that's going to conclude the questions for today. So I'll have the question box on my Instagram story next Friday, and we'll do this again the following Sunday. And again, all my guest podcasts are going to be dropping on Tuesdays. As you know, Joe Ken's going to be next in the lineup. And then other than that, guys, if you're interested in one-on-one comprehensive coaching for nutrition or training, this is what I do now. This is my full time. I'm bringing 9 years of experience as a strength and conditioning coach in the NFL and Division I football, years and years and years of research, studying, academic background in nutrition. This is my passion. So if you're looking for quality coaching with a genuine coaching relationship, shoot me a DM on Instagram. Otherwise, you can find my physique or power building program available on Train Heroic. Link is in my bio. If you haven't already, guys, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm going to keep cranking out some good content on that. I just wrapped up shooting the podcast with Mark Bell, so that should be coming out in the next few weeks, and I'll be doing the Table Talk podcast with Dave Tate in Ohio in a couple weeks, and I'll be at the Arnold. So keep an eye out for all that, guys. I appreciate all the support. You guys are literally helping put bread on the table for my wife and baby boy, so they thank you as well. And we'll catch you next time on the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast.